For millions of us who grew up in the late 70s and 80s, this was more than just a TV show. It was a weekly appointment with America's favorite family. The Bradfords of 8 is Enough were the family we all wanted to be a part of. They were chaotic, they were loving, they were funny, and most of all, they were real. 8 kids navigating life together under the watchful eye of their patient father, Tom Bradford. And among them was Mary, the eldest daughter, the thoughtful beauty with a gentle smile and a quiet, contemplative nature that made her feel like the soul of the family. She was the aspiring doctor, the responsible one, the sister you could always turn to. Lani O'Grady, the actress who brought Mary to life, projected a warmth and an easy grace that felt completely authentic. She was a welcome, comforting presence in our living rooms every week. But behind that gentle smile and far away from the carefully lit studio sets, Lani was fighting a private war so terrifying, so profound, that it would eventually consume her entirely. The story of Lani O'Grady isn't just another Hollywood tragedy about the perils of fame. It's a much darker, more complicated tale. It's a story about a secret that began long before the cameras started rolling. A silent struggle against an invisible enemy that lived inside her own mind. An enemy that, with the help of doctors and a seemingly endless supply of prescription pads, would systematically dismantle the life of one of television's most beloved daughters, leaving a trail of heartbreak and a medical history that one coroner would later describe as simply horrific. This is the story of the life and the tragic unraveling of Lani O'Grady. To understand Lani's story, you have to understand the world that made her a star. The late 1970s in America was a time of transition. The turmoil and cynicism of the Vietnam and Watergate years were beginning to fade, and audiences were craving a different kind of television. The gritty, socially conscious sitcoms of the early 70s were making way for something warmer, more aspirational. People wanted comfort food for the soul, and Hollywood was happy to provide it. Shows like Happy Days, The Waltons, and Little House on the Prairie celebrated a return to family values and a simpler, more wholesome vision of American life. Into this landscape, in 1977 came 8 is Enough. Based on the real-life story of journalist Tom Braden, the show was an instant hit. It was the perfect blend of comedy and drama, tackling relatable family issues with a gentle touch. It was a televisual hug, a promise that no matter how chaotic life got, the love of a family could see you through anything. But for Lani O'Grady, the concept of family was inextricably linked with the business of Hollywood itself. She was born Lanita Rose O'Grady in 1954 into what could be described as a working-class Hollywood dynasty. Her mother, Mary Grady, was one of the most respected and successful children's talent agents in the industry. For decades, Mary Grady's agency was the go-to place for casting directors looking for young talent. She wasn't just an agent, she was a Hollywood institution. Lani's older brother, Don O'Grady, was also a star. He was one of the original Disney Mouseketeers, and then spent years playing Robbie Douglas on the classic sitcom My Three Sons. For Lani, show business wasn't something she chose. It was the air she breathed. She grew up surrounded by headshots, scripts, and the constant hum of a business built on youth and image. This environment provided incredible opportunities, but it also came with a unique and unrelenting pressure. While her mother was known for being fiercely protective of her young clients, the expectations on her own children were immense. Even more crucial to her story, however, was something that had nothing to do with Hollywood. A shadow had fallen over Lani long before the spotlight ever found her. In a startlingly candid interview years later, she revealed that she had her first full-blown panic attack at the age of 13. She described the terrifying, inexplicable sensation, the racing heart, the cold sweat, the absolute conviction that she was about to die. In the 1960s, terms like panic attack or anxiety disorder weren't part of the public vocabulary. It was a bewildering and deeply isolating experience. This wasn't a phase, it was the beginning of a lifelong battle with an anxiety so severe it would later be diagnosed as panic disorder and agoraphobia, a terrifying fear of open spaces or situations where escape might be difficult. This pre-existing vulnerability, this quiet terror brewing just beneath the surface, was the secret she would carry with her onto the set of one of America's most popular television shows. Fame didn't create Lani's problems. It would simply pour gasoline on a fire that was already burning. Lani began acting professionally as a teenager, landing small roles in shows like Harry O. She was a natural with a photogenic quality and an understated presence that drew the camera in. In 1977, she auditioned for the role of Mary Bradford in the new ABC series 8 is Enough. She won the part, and overnight, her life was transformed. The show was an immediate sensation, and Lani, along with her 7 television siblings, became one of the most recognizable young faces in America. On the surface, she handled the pressures of fame with grace. Cast and crew members from that time remember her as a dedicated professional, always prepared, always kind. Dick Van Patten, who played her television father, Tom Bradford, spoke of her with great affection, noting her sweetness and talent. But behind the scenes, the war inside her was escalating. The grueling schedule of a weekly television series, the long hours, the public scrutiny, the constant demand to be on, was a nightmare for someone secretly battling severe anxiety. She later described how the panic attacks began to strike on set. She would be in the middle of a scene and suddenly feel the familiar wave of terror wash over her. Her heart would pound, her vision would tunnel, and she would struggle to remember her lines. In one interview, she confessed to experiencing what she called blackouts, episodes of memory loss so profound that she would have no recollection of filming entire scenes. She became a master of concealment, using her acting skills not just to portray Mary Bradford, but to mask the debilitating fear that was threatening to engulf her. One of the most poignant and rarely discussed aspects of her struggle was the development of agoraphobia while she was at the peak of her fame. The fear became so intense that she started to dread leaving the sanctuary of her dressing room. The vast open space of the soundstage, filled with crew members and bright lights, felt like a threat. This was the terrifying paradox of her life. Every week, she was broadcast into more than 20 million homes, a symbol of happy, confident young womanhood, while in reality she was becoming a prisoner of her own fear, her world shrinking with each passing day. It was during this time that her journey into the world of prescription medication began. Seeking help for her debilitating symptoms, she was introduced to what was then considered a miracle drug, Valium. In the late 1970s, Valium and other benzodiazepines were prescribed with an ease that seems shocking today. They were seen as a safe, non-addictive solution for anxiety, stress, and insomnia. Mother's little helper, as the Rolling Stones sang. For Lani, the first time she took the drug, it must have felt like a godsend. For the first time in years, the crushing anxiety receded. The panic subsided. She could breathe again. She later recalled, it was like, oh my God, this is the way I'm supposed to feel. It was a moment of profound relief, but it was also the first step down a very dangerous path. When 8 is Enough ended its successful 5-year run in 1981, the structure and routine that had, in some ways, kept her grounded disappeared. For many actors, the end of a long-running series is a difficult transition. For Lani, it was catastrophic. Without the daily demands of work to distract her, her anxiety and agoraphobia returned with a vengeance. She largely retreated from Hollywood, appearing only in a couple of Eight Is Enough reunion movies. She tried to build a life away from the spotlight. She got married and, in a move that spoke volumes about her upbringing, began working as a talent agent, essentially following in her mother's footsteps. There were periods of relative stability, moments where it seemed she had found a fragile peace. But the underlying anxiety never truly went away, and her reliance on prescription medication grew. Over the next 2 decades, Lani's life became a revolving door of doctors, therapists, and pharmacies. She was desperate for a cure, for an explanation for the terror that hijacked her mind. She sought help repeatedly, but the medical system of the time often treated her symptoms rather than the root cause. She was prescribed a staggering cocktail of drugs, antidepressants, mood stabilizers like lithium, and an ever-increasing dose of benzodiazepines to manage her panic attacks. At some point, she was also given a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, though it's unclear if this was accurate or a reflection of a system trying to label a complex set of symptoms it didn't fully understand. Her brain chemistry, she said, was shot. Each new prescription was a new promise of relief, but it only seemed to pull her deeper into a fog of dependency, memory loss, and despair. To truly understand the tragedy of Lani O'Grady, we have to look past the diagnoses and the headlines and try to imagine the sheer terror of her daily existence. Her own words, from rare interviews she gave in the 1990s in an attempt to raise awareness, paint a devastating picture. "I'd be driving on the freeway and I'd have to pull over," she explained, "or I'd be in the grocery store and I'd have to leave the cart and run out. I'd think I was dying." This wasn't a choice. It wasn't a weakness. It was a neurological storm that she was powerless to control. Her agoraphobia became so severe that for long periods she couldn't leave her home at all. The woman whose face was once a comforting presence in millions of living rooms was now too terrified to walk to her own mailbox. Her relationships inevitably suffered. Her marriage ended. Her connection to the outside world frayed. Her family, particularly her mother Mary, was caught in an agonizing position. Mary Grady was a formidable woman, a powerhouse in her industry who had guided the careers of countless young stars. But she found herself helpless in the face of her own daughter's invisible illness. She tried to get Lani the best care, to support her financially and emotionally, but she was navigating a medical and psychological labyrinth. There's a heartbreaking complexity to their relationship. Growing up as the daughter of a super agent, Lani was steeped in a world where appearance was everything. Admitting to a defect, especially an invisible one like mental illness, was a taboo that went against every principle of the business. How much of Lani's drive to conceal her suffering came from this ingrained need to always be perfect, to never show a flaw? It's a question without an easy answer. Her TV family was also largely unaware of the depths of her struggle during the show's run. In later interviews, some cast members expressed shock and sadness, remembering her only as a sweet, if sometimes quiet, colleague. Willie Ames, who played her TV brother Tommy, spoke of the cast as a real family, but admitted that in the whirlwind of production, it was easy to miss the signs. The very nature of her illness was one of secrecy and shame. She was suffering in plain sight, and almost no one knew. The most devastating impact was on Lani herself. The long-term use of benzodiazepines is known to cause significant cognitive impairment. Lani spoke of huge gaps in her memory. She couldn't remember major life events, couldn't recall large portions of her time on Eight Is Enough. Imagine the horror of losing your own past, of your most successful and vibrant years being a blur. Her identity, once so clearly defined as Mary Bradford, was dissolving. She was losing not just her career and her freedom, but herself. Her struggle wasn't just with fear, it was with the erasure of her own life story, one prescription at a time. It's easy to look at Lani O'Grady's story and simply blame drugs, but that would be a profound oversimplification. The real controversy at the heart of her tragedy is not one of illicit substance abuse, but of a systemic failure within the medical establishment of the era. Lani was not a recreational user seeking a high. She was a desperate patient seeking relief, and the system prescribed her a solution that ultimately became a poison. In the 1970s and 80s, the pharmaceutical industry marketed benzodiazepines as a revolutionary cure for the anxieties of modern life. They were handed out by doctors for everything from mild stress to profound panic. The culture surrounding them was one of casual acceptance. They were nerve pills, a quick fix. What was not widely understood, or at least not widely communicated to patients, was their extreme potential for physical and psychological dependence. Weaning off long-term, high-dose benzodiazepine use can be more dangerous and difficult than detoxing from heroin, often leading to protracted withdrawal syndromes and a permanent alteration of brain chemistry. Lani was a textbook victim of this system. She went to doctors for help and they gave her pills. When the pills stopped working as effectively, they increased the dose or added another medication to the cocktail. She was caught in a cycle of iatrogenic or medically induced addiction. She was following doctors' orders, trusting the experts to help her, but the very treatment she was receiving was deepening her illness. This raises an unsettling historical debate. Were the doctors who treated her simply products of their time, operating with the best but limited knowledge available? Or was there a degree of negligence involved, a failure to recognize the signs of a growing catastrophic dependency? The truth is likely somewhere in the murky middle. The medical field's understanding of both panic disorders and the long-term effects of psychotropic drugs was in its infancy. Lani was in many ways a guinea pig in a vast, uncontrolled experiment. Her eventual diagnosis of bipolar disorder also adds a layer of complexity. Was it an accurate diagnosis, or was it a misinterpretation of the extreme mood swings and cognitive dysfunction caused by her long-term medication use and withdrawal attempts? We will never know for sure. What is clear is that for decades, Lani was trapped by her initial illness, and then trapped by the cure that had become its own disease. When she tried to speak out about her experiences in the 1990s, she was a voice in the wilderness. The full-blown opioid and prescription drug crisis that we are so familiar with today had not yet entered the public consciousness. She was sounding an alarm that few were ready to hear. The story of Lani O'Grady forces us to look beyond the final tragic headline of her death and consider its larger significance. What can we learn from a life so filled with public success and private agony? Her story is first and foremost a powerful deconstruction of the comforting illusions sold by television. The Bradfords were the perfect family, but the real people who played them were just as fragile and vulnerable as the rest of us. Lani's life is a heartbreaking reminder that the smiling faces on our screens are often masks concealing battles we can barely imagine. More importantly, Lani O'Grady stands as a haunting forerunner of one of the biggest medical and social crises of the 21st century, the prescription drug epidemic. Decades before the opioid crisis became front-page news, Lani's story laid bare the devastating potential of legally prescribed medications. She was a canary in the coal mine, a high-profile victim of a system that was creating addicts in the name of treatment. Her struggle highlights the immense responsibility of the medical community and the pharmaceutical industry, and the devastating human cost when that responsibility is abdicated. Her story is not a relic of the past. It is more relevant today than ever, a cautionary tale that echoes in the lives of millions who have been ensnared by a similar cycle. Her life also matters because it represents a pivotal moment in the public conversation around mental health. In the 1970s and 80s, admitting to a condition like agoraphobia or panic disorder was a source of deep shame, especially for a public figure. It was seen as a personal failing, not a legitimate medical condition. Lani fought her battle in silence for years. When she did finally find the courage to speak publicly about her struggles, it was an act of immense bravery. She was attempting to use her platform to tell the world that mental illness was real, that prescription drug dependency was real, and that people were suffering. While her message may not have fully broken through at the time, she was part of a slow, crucial shift. She was one of the early voices that paved the way for the celebrities of today who can now speak openly about their anxiety, depression, and mental health challenges without the same fear of career-ending stigma. She helped in her own small, tragic way to crack open a door that had been sealed shut for far too long. On September 25, 2001, Lani O'Grady was found dead in her home in Valencia, California. She was only 46 years old. The coroner's report confirmed what many had feared. She had died of a multiple drug intoxication. The toxicology report revealed a lethal combination of the antidepressant Prozac and the powerful painkiller Vicodin. Her long, agonizing war was finally over. In the end, what is the takeaway from a life like Lani's? There are no easy answers, no single villain to blame. It wasn't fame that destroyed her. The seeds of her anxiety were planted long before. It wasn't just a simple case of addiction. She was a patient desperately seeking help from a system that ultimately failed her. Her story is a perfect storm, a tragic convergence of a pre-existing vulnerability, the immense pressures of a Hollywood childhood, the blinding glare of television stardom, and a medical culture that was too quick to prescribe and too slow to understand. Lani O'Grady gave millions of people a sense of comfort and family every week, yet she could find so little of that peace for herself. She spent decades fighting, seeking help, and even trying to warn others, all while battling an inner world of unimaginable fear. Perhaps the most fitting way to remember her is not as just another Hollywood casualty, but as a woman of incredible hidden strength. She survived for 26 years after her show ended, far longer than many might have in her circumstances. She fought for her life, for her sanity, for a moment of quiet. Her story compels us to look with more empathy at the people behind the images we consume and to question the easy solutions we are so often sold in a little brown bottle. Lani O'Grady deserved a better story. The least we can do is remember the real one.